we got to look at the things we've done and are they getting us the results? And if they're not, then we got to really rethink, what are the assumptions we're making? And why are the assumptions, if they're wrong, are the assumptions getting us, a wrong set of course of actions and ultimately a wrong set of results from what we wanted?
All right. What about we list some of the assumptions? I think that
Yep.
this would
Yep.
help.
Beautiful. So I'll in this book I talked about 4 big ones, right? And these ones, if you really think about what you hear probably in Germany, in India, in the US, and elsewhere, these are the 4 big buckets, right? The first is, the Chinese have taken away so many jobs in America, especially manufacturing, right? So that's a big one, which is, the economic fallout from the rise of China. Now, so this idea is called the China shock. I've talked to the key authors of the China shock, professors who work at Harvard, MIT, and I've talked to a bunch of professors who've done work in this space. And they found that, yes, it's true. In a span of 10 years, the United States lost about 4 million manufacturing jobs. Now, how many of those jobs are attributed to China? It's hard to say, but let's say all of them are attributed. And this is what President Trump in his first term would say over and over again: 4 million manufacturing jobs lost to China, right? However, he only talks about the first part. All of the research shows that an equal number, if not more, jobs were created because China was now able to offer lower cost components, kind of supply chain items. An equal, if not more, jobs were created, but in this case, along the coast of America. So a perfect example would be Apple, right? Apple basically outsourced all of their manufacturing to China through a supplier called Foxconn. However, with all that savings, they were able to hire a ton more engineers, designers, marketers, etc. Now, the sad thing is most of them were congregated on the coastal areas like Silicon Valley and elsewhere. And so the takeaway from the China shock isn't that manufacturing jobs went away. It's more that the benefits and the fallouts of globalization are unevenly distributed. The regions where people are less educated, less mobile, namely a lot of southern and middle parts of America, suffer the most, while the coastal parts really benefited. And so the takeaway is that we really need to have a better domestic policy within America to make sure that the globalization efforts that's happening benefits everybody equally and not just certain parts of America. So that's the first part, right? And then the second part is, we hear a lot about not just the Chinese stealing jobs, but also about this trade imbalance. Here's the interesting thing: if you look at 2023, today it's a little bit off because so much trade has now shifted to third countries, but the numbers are probably largely similar. There's about $1.2 trillion of trade activities done between the US and China. We only hear about the 600 billion or so of exports, imports in the US. But there's also another about 500 billion or 600 billion. Most of that is American businesses having facilities and businesses in China, like Starbucks, McDonald's, etc. It's just that money that's made in China doesn't come back to the US, right? So if you look at the overall relationship, it's roughly equal, about $1.2 trillion. 600 billion one way, 600 billion another way. So this is why I go back to the first thing I told you is, as I looked into this more, I realized what America must face is less about what China is doing. It's more about what we're doing, right? So the next thing, and this is something that President Trump tried to tackle, obviously. So I give him credit where credit is due, is how to make sure that American companies that have so much profits outside of the United States bring that money back and reinvest in America, right? So the 2 key takeaways are not that, China is the bad person, because if we destroy China, the truth is, the American companies are still going to India, they're going to Mexico, they're going to Malaysia, they're going to Indonesia, right? And especially when America is no longer a manufacturing-based economy, we're a service-based economy. We're also looking at service-based competitors like in India, like a Philippines, like other English-speaking low-cost countries. So the whole idea is not just keeping everybody out, but how do you deal with the uneven distribution of the benefits of globalization? And how do you make sure that all these American companies are doing really well outside of America, also bring the profits back to benefit Americans? So that's the first one, right? The second one is really around IP. So President Trump, in his first term, and even today, many politicians will use the number $600 billion, meaning $600 billion of intellectual property has been stolen by the Chinese. Now, I'm a numbers person. I'm an engineer by training. I did industrial engineering and computer science at Stanford. So I like to ask how people get their numbers. And I ask everybody, how do you get the 600 billion number? And I realized in the end, having talked to experts, it's actually not a number on China. It's a number that OECD approximates as a percentage of annual IP loss, meaning IP loss is estimated across all economies of being 2 to 3%. And the US economy is at the time about $20 trillion. So 2 to 3% is 600 billion. So it's a rough number. And then, of course, the administration decided to attribute all of that 600 billion to the Chinese, even though if you look at the Chinese numbers, it's much, much smaller. And majority of that is counterfeit goods, meaning, like fake Nikes and fake shoes and fake toys being sent to the United States. Not that that's not a big issue, but the idea that IP theft, intellectual property theft of advanced technology being 600 billion, that number is just simply not true. Now, I've talked to a lot of experts. Of course, it's very hard to estimate how much IP is being stolen. And by the way, I mentioned I started a business in China before, and I had a Chinese competitor try to steal our IP. So I'm intimately familiar with this. I think $1 of IP stolen is bad, but the actual number does matter, right? And in my book, I also talk about credible organizations estimated that actual intellectual property theft of the Chinese to the US is maybe about $30 billion, $20, $30 billion a year. Now, that's not a small number, but that's a big difference between 600 billion. Namely, it's about 96, 97% difference, right? Again, like I said in the beginning, it's not that China is not a threat. It's what kind of threat it is. A $600 billion threat and a $30 billion threat, it's a big difference. It's between a category 5 and maybe a category 2, right? So that's the second one. The third one is...
Can I stop you for a second?
Right. Of course.
Have you seen this news? It came out, I think, very recently, like October, yeah. China, Russia, let me share the screen for the audience. China and Russia are seducing US techies with attractive women for secrets. So basically, they're weaponizing sex. They're clever, my friend. they know what they're doing. Have you heard about that?
I haven't. And but this article is very interesting because